Simón Bolivar is probably the most recognizable name in Latin American history. He's best remembered for his prominent role in the independence of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. That's why he's called El Libertador, or the Liberator. Simón Bolivar died in 1830, and yet 195 years later, his political ideas, motivations, and legacy remain open to interpretation and controversy. And today there's probably a Bolivarian narrative for every taste and creed. This lecture focuses on two main questions. First, why did wealthy creoles such as Simón Bolivar want independence from Spain? And second, what role did Simón Bolivar play in the wars of independence? For 300 years, Spain ruled its enormous American empire without many serious challenges from the people living in the colonies. But between 1808 and 1824, anti-colonial revolutions in Spanish America led to the creation of several new republics. Spain's American empire was reduced to just two islands, Cuba and Puerto Rico. Let's begin with a brief review of Spanish-American colonial societies and understand why wealthy creoles such as Simón Bolivar led the movements to separate from Spain. Spanish-American colonial societies were hierarchical and racially divided. In the early 16th century, most of the Spaniards who traveled to the Americas were young males. And although most of the peninsulares or immigrants from the Iberian Peninsula in the 16th and 17th centuries belonged to the lower classes in European society, they placed themselves at the top of the social order that they created and held all the top positions in colonial government and church. Peninsulares comprised the officer corps of the military, and most of the wealthy merchants were peninsulares. Peninsulares were a numerical minority in America, but they owned most of the land and slaves, and the indigenous majority worked for them. Peninsulares established their authority and superior social status on the concept of limpieza de sangre, or their presumed purity of lineage, which was not contaminated by African or indigenous blood. Now, in Europe, Spanish Catholics considered themselves to be superior to Jews and Muslims, and they carried that concept to their colonies. The term Creole referred to the children of the peninsulares who were born in the Americas. Now, Creoles were of European descent. The only difference between the Creoles and their peninsular parents was their place of birth. Now, because Creoles were not born in Spain, they went down one notch in the social order. The Spanish king appointed only people from Spain, that is peninsulares, to high-ranking positions like viceroys, governors, and archbishops. In the 17th century, Spain had a financial deficit, so the Spanish king auctioned positions in the cabildos or municipal council to the highest bidders. And some wealthy creoles bought some of those positions and gained access to positions in municipal councils. However, high-ranking positions could never be held by creoles because they were exclusively reserved for the peninsula. Now, Spanish colonialism established an enduring casta system that divided people into two main categories based on their racial lineage. Gente decente, or respectable people, included all peninsulares, creoles, and their families. Now, this was the privileged minority group to which all top-ranking bureaucrats, wealthy businessmen, military officers, and the clergy belonged. The second social category was gente de pueblo, which comprised Africans, indigenous, and interracial people. It was the mixing of three main racial groups, that is, Spaniards, Africans, and indigenous peoples, that created a social order based on racial ancestry. Mestizos were of Spanish and indigenous ancestry. Mulattoes of African and European descent. Zambos of African and indigenous parentage. Now, this casta system of legal and social discrimination placed Peninsulares at the top of the pyramid. Creoles were second, and in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Spanish king and wealthy Spaniards commissioned casta paintings that showed the rigid racial classification. Now, this is a casta painting from the 18th century. It has 16 panels, and under each panel, you'll see the legal name for each racial group. Each panel shows a man and a woman of differing races, along with their children. And this racial diversity made the Peninsulares and Creoles fearful about revolts. So they constantly emphasize these social hierarchies to maintain their authority and privileges. In 1800, the population of Spain was approximately 11 million. Spanish America included California, Texas, most of Central and South America, plus some islands in the Caribbean. And the population of Spanish America was approximately 15 million. Approximately 25% of Spain's revenues came from Spanish America. Social and economic conditions varied in this vast empire, but by 1800, approximately 30% of the population in Spanish America was Creole. Indigenous peoples made up about 40% of the population, and other interracial groups together comprised about 20 to 25% of the population. My point is, the number of Peninsulares was very small. Spain did not maintain a large army in the colonies, but as the American, French, and Haitian revolutions unfolded, the Spanish kings sent more troops to the colonies to suppress indigenous and slave revolts. And although the Creoles were wealthy and part of the privileged gente decente, there were several reasons why resentment developed over time between Creoles and Peninsulares. Creoles objected to the Bourbon reforms. Starting in 1767, Spain introduced a series of laws known as the Bourbon reforms to close all the tax loopholes, introduce new taxes, bring the Catholic Church firmly under the king's control, and generate more revenue for Spain. The Bourbon reforms deliberately replaced Creoles with Peninsulares in public positions, including the local cabildos or municipal councils. In other words, Creoles lost access to government positions and they didn't want to pay higher taxes. Creoles were plantation owners and they produced agricultural products for export, but they could not trade freely, especially with the British. They were required to trade only with Spain, and they were frustrated by the restrictions of Spain's bureaucracy, mercantilistic monopoly, and controls. Now let's briefly review the early life and important military campaigns of Simón Bolívar. Simón José Antonio de la Santísima Trinidad Bolívar Palacios Ponte y Blanco was born in Caracas in Venezuela on July 24, 1783. Today, July 24th is a national holiday in Venezuela, and Simón Bolivar Day is celebrated in many Latin American countries to commemorate his birth anniversary. Simón Bolivar was born into an aristocratic family that owned several large cacao plantations and slaves. Venezuela was a very successful plantation colony which exported coffee, indigo, and cacao. and Venezuela was geographically closest to Spain. Venezuela was part of the Viceroyalty of New Granada, which included present-day nations of Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, and Venezuela. The Viceroy lived in Bogota, in present-day Colombia. Now, Simón Bolívar was the youngest of 4 children. He had an older brother and 2 sisters. And when he was 3 years old, his father died. His mother died when he was about 9 years old. Simón Bolívar inherited his own share of his parents' properties, plantations, cattle herds, and slaves, and he was one of the wealthiest people in Caracas. His early education included reading and writing, and then starting at the age of 14, he received some formal military training and attained the rank of sub-lieutenant. He traveled to Europe between 1803 and 1807, and that widened his intellectual horizons, and he was greatly influenced by the Enlightenment. Simón Bolívar stayed in Madrid for some time, where he fell madly in love with a Spanish girl named María Teresa Rodríguez del Toro. Bolívar was only 18 years old, and María Teresa was 21 years old when they married in Madrid in May 1802. Now, this is a painting depicting the wedding of Simón Bolívar and María Teresa del Toro. It was painted by a Venezuelan artist, Tito Salas, in 1921. Now, after the wedding, the young couple returned to Venezuela. But unfortunately, just 8 months later, María Teresa fell ill, most likely from malaria or yellow fever, and she died in January 1803. The unexpected death of the love of his life was traumatic for Simón Bolívar. And the heartbroken Bolívar swore that he would never remarry. And it's a fact that Bolívar never remarried. Well, he had many love affairs. But moving on. After the tragic death of his wife, María Teresa, Bolívar made another trip to Europe. And during that trip, he reconnected with one of his teachers, Simón Rodríguez, and traveled with him to Italy. And some biographers say that his teacher guided Bolívar into politics. Simón Bolívar also traveled to France, and while living in Paris, he socialized with the leading political and intellectual figures in Paris, and he witnessed the coronation of Napoleon. Initially, Bolívar was captivated by Napoleon's image as a hero savior, but later Bolívar criticized Napoleon for betraying the republican ideals of the French Revolution. In Europe, Bolívar read books by Locke, Rousseau, Paine, Hobbes, and other intellectuals of the Enlightenment, and he incorporated many of their ideas about abolishing monarchy and establishing a republic. Gradually, Bolívar became an advocate for Spanish-American independence, and in 1806, Simón Bolívar set sail from Hamburg to Charleston in South Carolina. He spent a few months in the United States and then returned to Venezuela in 1807. He was only 24 years old. Now let's review Simón Bolívar's role in the Wars of Independence. In 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte forced the King of Spain, Charles IV, to abdicate in favor of his son, Prince Ferdinand VII. Then, in a dramatic move, Napoleon held both Charles IV and Ferdinand VII hostage in France and crowned his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, King of Spain. What were people in Spain's colonies to do? From their perspective, Joseph Bonaparte lacked legitimacy. So creoles began to consider various options to rework their relationship with Spain. Meanwhile, in Spain, Spaniards responded by forming committees or juntas to resist French occupation and govern in place of the Spanish king. Now, the most important of these was the Central Junta of Seville. And the creoles demanded equal representation in the junta, but the Spanish juntas did not concede to that. And when the Central Junta of Seville in Spain tried to govern the colonies, the creoles rejected its authority. In 1810, the Central Junta dissolved itself and appointed a regency to rule Spain through a Spanish parliament, which convened in the port city of Cadiz. Now, Cadiz was the last city under Spanish control in Spain. Creole and Spanish deputies wrote the Constitution of 1812, and this new constitution provided for a limited monarchy, abolished the Inquisition, and gave the Spanish American provinces a large measure of home rule by expanding the number of recognized municipal councils. But it emphasized that peninsular domination and commercial monopoly would remain intact. So between 1808 and 1810, Venezuelan creoles who anticipated the imminent collapse of Cadiz also proclaimed a junta to govern Venezuela in the name of the Spanish king until he was restored to the throne. Now, the creoles were not united. Some of them continued to support the Spanish king, but some wanted independence from Spain. In 1811, a group of wealthy Venezuelan creoles, to which Simón Bolivar belonged, overthrew the Spanish governor in Caracas. And the Caracas junta was the first to declare Venezuela's independence from Spain and establish a republic. Inspired by the US Constitution, Venezuelan creoles incorporated the idea of federalism, which divided power between the central government and the states. It gave a lot of power to the provinces, but the central government was quite weak. Now, the Constitution of the First Republic abolished special privileges and indigenous tributes, but it retained slavery and made Catholicism the state religion and recognized only property owners as full citizens. The lower classes were not allowed to participate in politics. In 1812, a powerful earthquake caused a lot of destruction in Caracas, especially in areas controlled by the patriots or creoles who wanted independence from Spain. The Spanish forces or royalists quickly proclaimed that the disaster was divine retribution against the patriots. The royalists under the leadership of Domingo Monteverde formed a coalition with creoles who did not support the republic and mulattoes, and jointly they defeated the patriots and re-established their control over Caracas. So that was the end of the First Republic. The First Republic of Venezuela lasted only for a year. Bolivar fled towards Cartagena, the main seaport of New Granada. In December 1812, he wrote the Cartagena Manifesto. Now, this was his first major political statement to the people of New Granada, in which he stated the main reasons for the failure of the First Republic. He wrote, "Our division, not the Spanish forces, is what defeated the Republic." He thought it was a mistake to adopt US federalism because it didn't provide for a strong, unifying national government. Federalism was designed for provinces to focus on local issues rather than national needs. And Bolivar always wanted a strong central executive. He realized that European political philosophies were not suitable for Spanish American societies, which were racially divided and dominated by the Catholic Church. Now, the main goal of the Cartagena Manifesto was to recruit support for a military campaign to liberate Venezuela from Spanish control. Now, at this time, Bolivar did not have much military experience, but he was able to recruit a small number of troops and was given the task to clear the Magdalena River in northern Colombia of royalist troops. With very few casualties, Bolivar successfully led the Magdalena military campaign that included swift movements, ruthless tactics, and a merit-based system of promotion for his soldiers. And with every military victory, Bolivar's reputation grew and the size of his army increased. A victory at Cucuta gained Bolivar the rank of general in the army and approval of his plan for the liberation of Venezuela. This is called the Admirable Campaign. Over 3 months, he led 500 men through Venezuela's Andean region towards Caracas. Meanwhile, Spaniards had unleashed a campaign of terror and committed atrocities on civilians to prevent them from helping Bolivar and the patriots. Bolivar responded by proclaiming a war to the death against all Spaniards, meaning any Spanish prisoner who refused to fight for Venezuelan independence was executed. In 1813, as Bolivar approached Caracas, the Spaniards withdrew and he entered the capital city in triumph. The city council gave him the title of El Libertador, or the Liberator, and the Second Republic of Venezuela was established and Bolivar was granted dictatorial powers. However, his success was short-lived. The following year, Royalists drove Bolivar and his supporters out of Caracas. Meanwhile, in Spain, Ferdinand VII was restored to the Spanish throne after the defeat of Napoleon. Immediately, Ferdinand VII sent a huge army to regain control of New Granada. And some scholars have speculated that had Ferdinand VII offered legal equality for all races, the Spanish Empire might have lingered on much longer. But the Spanish king did not make any such concessions. In Venezuela, the cowboys or llaneros also turned against the republic because of the agrarian edicts that attempted to end cattle hunting in the llanos or plains without written permission from the landowners. So these attacks on their customary rights and freedoms angered the llaneros. And in July 1814, Bolivar suffered a humiliating defeat by armies comprised mostly of black and mulatto llaneros led by José Tomás Boves, who died on the battlefield, but his troops routed Bolivar and destroyed the Second Republic. In 1815, the outlook for independence looked grim. Bolivar left for Jamaica, which was under British control, and in Jamaica, Bolivar hoped to get British support for Spanish-American independence from Spain. Bolivar wrote a letter to Henry Cullen, an Englishman living in Jamaica. This is the Jamaica letter, formally titled Reply of a South American to a Gentleman of this Island, in which Bolivar sharply criticized Spanish colonial rule, articulated the Spanish-American demand for independence, as well as his vision for constitutional republics. And for the Viceroyalty of New Granada, he imagined a government modeled on that of Great Britain with a hereditary upper house, an elected lower house, and a president chosen for life. From Jamaica, Bolivar traveled to Haiti, where he gathered weapons, recruited Creole exiles, and then returned to Venezuela in 1816. He actively recruited slaves to join his army by promising to free them after independence. His emancipation policy was tied to military conscription, but he understood that a nation cannot be simultaneously free and enslaved. Bolivar set up his military headquarters in the town of Angostura, which is present-day Ciudad Bolivar. Many llaneros supported Bolivar at this critical juncture. The principal llanero chieftain, Jose Antonio Paez, joined Bolivar. And after the end of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, several British soldiers came to Venezuela to form a British legion that helped Bolivar. And British merchants also loaned money to Bolivar and the patriots to buy weapons, and this really helped. In 1817, Simón Bolivar established the Third Republic of Venezuela. In 1819, Bolivar convened a political meeting attended by 26 people, and Bolivar gave a speech at the inaugural session known as the Angostura Address, in which he explained the need for a strong central executive. And he once again articulated the need to abolish slavery and distribute confiscated property among soldiers. The Congress of Angostura laid the foundation for Gran Colombia, an independent and united republic whose territory included present-day Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador. Now, Ecuador and many parts of Venezuela, including Caracas, were still under Spanish control. The War of Independence still had to be won. The Congress of Angostura adopted a fundamental law of the Republic that created a framework for governance headed by a president and a vice president. Soon after, Bolivar left Angostura and launched a massive military campaign that took his own army across the swamps and through the high mountain passes in the Andes into Colombia. Many of his own soldiers suffered terribly due to the harsh environmental conditions, but on August 7, 1819, his army defeated the Royalists at the famous Battle of Boyacá. Now, this was one of the most important victories of Bolivar. The viceroy fled and Colombia became free from Spanish control. Bolivar left General Francisco Santander to organize a provisional government in Bogota. And Bolivar hurried back to Angostura to prepare for the liberation of Venezuela. On June 24, 1821, Bolivar's armies defeated the Spanish forces in Venezuela at Carabobo, and this permanently ended Spanish rule in Venezuela and led to the establishment of the Republic of Gran Colombia. Bogota became the national capital, and the Constituent Assembly met in Cucuta near the Venezuelan border to create a new constitution for Gran Colombia. Bolivar was elected as the president and Santander the VP. Bolivar then planned a major offensive from Bogota against Quito. He sent one of his best generals, Antonio José Sucre, to seize the port of Guayaquil. And by the time Sucre reached there, Argentine General José de San Martin had already arrived in Guayaquil and proclaimed the independence of Peru. The two great liberators, Bolivar and San Martin, met in Guayaquil on July 26 and 27, 1822, and they discussed the future of Guayaquil. San Martin had claimed the port city for Peru, but the problem was that Bolivar had already made Ecuador part of Gran Colombia. So San Martin was faced with a fait accompli. The other discussion topic was the political future of Spanish America. Now, both San Martin and Bolivar liked the British system of constitutional monarchy, but unlike San Martin, Bolivar strongly believed that monarchy would not resolve the political chaos in the new republics. No agreement could be reached between the two liberators. Soon after the meeting in Guayaquil, San Martin went to Lima and announced his resignation and his retirement plan. He returned to Argentina, and a year later in 1823, he sailed to Europe along with his daughter, and he never returned to America. He died in France in 1850. The last major engagement with Spanish forces was in 1825 in Upper Peru. The Spanish army was defeated and South America was free of Spanish control. Upper Peru was renamed Bolivia in honor of Bolivar. In 1826, Bolivar wrote the Constitution of Bolivia. What made it controversial was that the president could hold a life term and had the power to select his successor as well. This feature was later removed. But at the end of 1826, Bolivar returned to Bogota only to find political conflicts. A faction that supported the Cucuta Constitution was led by Vice President Santander. The strongest federalist sentiments came from Venezuela, and those liberals allied themselves with Jose Antonio Paez against Bolivar. Now, Bolivar had hoped that the constitution of Cucuta would be revised and presidential authority strengthened, but the liberals blocked any such attempts. A stalemate developed. Bolivar assumed dictatorial powers in Gran Colombia. A group of liberal conspirators forcefully entered Bolivar's home in Bogota and tried to kill him in 1828. Manuela Sáenz, his lover and confidant, helped him escape through a window that night. Bolivar survived the assassination attempt, but he formally resigned and prepared to go into voluntary exile to Europe. But before he could embark for Europe, he died on 17th December 1830 at the age of 47 at Hacienda San Pedro Alejandrino in Santa Marta. Bolivar wished to be buried in Caracas, but the new leaders of Venezuela were his political rivals and they did not permit it. So his body was buried in the Cathedral of Santa Marta in Colombia, and in 1842 his remains were reburied in Caracas. Bolivar managed to unite Colombia and Venezuela, but that union had always been fragile. In 1830, the Republic of Gran Colombia dissolved and Venezuela declared independence. Great leaders possess certain natural abilities to inspire and lead, but they too are products of their times. Historians have noted some contradictory aspects of Bolivar's life. For example, Bolivar was highly influenced by the ideas of the Enlightenment and considered himself a free thinker. Yet, he created a strategic partnership with the Catholic Church and wanted his last rites to be done by a Catholic priest. He liked the idea of a strong government that protected basic human rights, but he exercised dictatorial powers. He was a slave owner, but he advocated the abolition of slavery. Now, slavery was not immediately abolished with independence. Not all creoles supported the abolition. In fact, the emancipation of the slaves repeatedly emerged as a politically divisive issue. Throughout the wars of independence, the ad hoc governments led by Bolivar and other elites claimed to speak for entire provinces, but there was resistance to their grand vision and authoritarian action. Spanish American societies were racially diverse, and people wanted to be in control of their own community. Soon after independence, leaders of the new republics declared national holidays that honored the Creole heroes of independence and their victories on the battlefield. New symbols of nationhood such as flags and monuments were created. But most people did not have a strong national identity that transcended racial and class divisions. Creole factions continued to fight for power, and the military became a powerful and prestigious institution. Political independence from Spain was not accompanied by land distribution or large-scale foreign investment to boost economic growth and prosperity. European nations used Latin America as a source of inexpensive raw materials for their industrial production and as an outlet for manufactured goods, especially British textiles. And unfortunately, independence did not grant women, indigenous people, or people of African descent legal equality. Please comment and subscribe to the channel if you appreciate the content. Thank you.